unto the Mount of Olives. Then sent Jesus 2 disciples, saying unto them, Go into the village over against you, and straightway you shall find an ass tied, and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them unto me. And if any man say aught unto you, you shall say, The Lord hath need of them, and straightway will he send them. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together this morning. And we just pray that all that's said and done would be to your honor and your glory. And I pray that you use me, Father, in the way that you'd want it to be used as we speak your word and give out your truth. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to look at that point that Jesus said, the Lord hath need of them. God knew, Jesus knew that those two animals were tied up there. He knew when they would be there. He knew what he would use them for. He knew everything about it. He had it in place to use those two people. Am I not on? I thought I turned it on. Okay, now it's on. Thank you. I do that in my church too. Those two animals were there for his use, and he had it planned. And that's what I want to kind of look at. A lot of you probably don't know me. I know Brother Lewis has known me a long time. I've known their two daughters almost as long as they have. And they both went to the school where I was a principal. No Brother Erling, because his daughter went there. But I want to I don't want to bore you with this, but kind of give you why I'm where I am today. Brother talked about going into the ministry at 70. I was 69 when I took over Sun Valley Baptist Church. Not what I expected to be doing at 69. But I went in the Army the first time in 1971. The Army was gracious to me. They sent me to the Republic of Vietnam. It was my first duty assignment. I came back and went to Fort Hood, Texas. I hated the Army. They only trained me to do one thing, and I did it for 2 weeks out of 3 years. So that kind of turned me off to the Army. When I was in Vietnam, I was in field artillery. That wasn't my job. I was in infantry. That wasn't my job. I got back to Fort Hood, Texas. I was a mail clerk. That wasn't my job. We went to Germany in 1973 in the middle of the winter. I had never been so cold in my life. And I got to do my job for 2 weeks. So I got out of the Army. I went to work for my dad, who was in construction. He was a carpenter. And I was watching him, and he was getting old, and he had no future, really. And I said, I got to thinking, you know what? The Army wasn't so bad. We had a retirement plan. We had, medical. We had everything going for us. So I said, I'll go back in the Army. It's not that. So I go back in the Army. I go back in the Air Defense Artillery. That's what Fort Bliss was. I didn't want to go to Fort Bliss, but that's where I had to go. I avoided Fort Bliss with all I could do until 1991. And then I couldn't seem to get away from it. But in 1991, we stayed there until 1994. I told my wife we're going to go to Germany. We was going to Germany from there. We're going to do 3 years in Germany. I'm going to come back. I have to have a year in the States, and then I'm going to retire. It's a done deal. I don't want no more. That would be at 26 years. So we come back. In the way back, we wanted to go to San Antonio. That was our desire. That was where we wanted to retire. We went to San Antonio. We went all through everything. We picked out a house. We picked out where we wanted to have it built. We gave a deposit. And then right before we left, my wife says, maybe we shouldn't do this. So we go back to Fort Bliss. They actually give us our deposit back. We go back to Fort Bliss. I get ready to retire. Pastor Berg, who is a pastor at Sun Valley, says, I'd like you to come and teach at the school. Have you ever thought about teaching? I said, well, yeah, kind of, sort of. And then it went for a few weeks, and he says, well, I want you to come and teach, and I want you to be a principal. The next thing he said, well, just come be the principal. So I retired in July the 3rd. I said my retirement ceremony. July the 6th, I went to work at school. They gave me 5 days off. Stayed there. My goal was not to stay there. This was a temporary thing. And So I finished my college education. I got it in human resources because that was closest I could get to my military experience. And I started putting in for civil service jobs. That was my goal. And I'd been there about 2 years or so, maybe 3. And I got a call from the Border Patrol. Well, from the civil service. And they had a job open with the Border Patrol. And they did an interview over the phone and everything. And the guy said, well, this looks good, but we'll let you know. And a few weeks later, Pastor Berg come in and he says, I got some sad news. He said, my wife has ovarian cancer. It's terminal. They give her 6 months to live. I said, wow, that's pretty tough. About 2 or 3 weeks later, they call me back. Hey, guess what? You got the job. I said, I can't do it. It's not the time to leave. I couldn't leave them in that kind of situation. So God stopped it. You know what? I kept putting in for those, after that was all over and it had gone kind of past a little while, I kept putting in for those jobs. Never got another call. So I stayed there, got ordained in 2007. I was the associate pastor. I was principal and became associate pastor for 3 years, and then that guy left that was over the principal job, and I became the associate pastor and the principal. So I did that till 2017. And I said, well, you know, time to go. I was 65 at that time. Wife and I wanted to go do some mission work. So I retired. We went to Korea a couple of times. For Korea, we went to China. It was an opening. We went to China one time, stayed about 2 weeks. Then later, because we knew some people in China by that time, we was able to go back for 3 months. And I was tutoring English, which is the way you get into a lot of these countries. Talk about the missionary that got killed and was doing that. So it seemed like a door open. We came back on one of our trips to Sun Valley. The associate that had took my place left. And so Pastor Berg was kind of stuck by himself, so I volunteered for a couple of years. And then we had planned, we had some property, 5 acres of land out in the middle of nowhere down in Central Texas, and we wanted to go down and do a ministry, kind of a retreat, pastor's retreat, missionaries retreat, because it was out in the country, it was nice and quiet. And we had all that planned. And we went down, we had 5 acres, we had it cleared, we had electricity put on it. We picked out our own mobile home that we were going to put on the property. Again, we gave a deposit on that. We come back, a couple of months later, we had done all kinds of stuff. Come back, and Pastor Berg said, man, I need to retire. Okay, good. Okay, why don't you retire? And we, went through the process of looking for a pastor. They kept asking me, why don't you just do it? I don't want to do it. But, to back up, when Pastor Berg's first wife, got sick, he came to me one day because they were going out of town for a lot of treatments, special treatments to get her some help. They would go to Arizona and different places. And he started asking me to preach on Sunday nights because we had an associate pastor. I said, okay. I started doing that. And that's where I kind of get this passage here from Matthew. That's how I wound up in the ministry. It was like I got drafted. I joined the Army the first time to keep from that. But I was there. And that's one thing that I think, because I wanted to talk about leadership this morning. And one of my points was going to be sacrifice. But we have to be available. And I think every pastor in here knows that's one of your biggest situations that you're in. It can be a time-consuming thing because everybody wants you available, right? But I was there, and I look back at it, and I know that God put me there. Now, we tried to leave El Paso. I tried to retire. First, I didn't want to be there. Then I tried to retire. We was going to go on missions work. Then we come back, and we want to retire, and we want to go over and do this other ministry. And about that time, Pastor Berg said he wanted to retire. And they kept bugging me. Why don't you do it? You're familiar with the school. You're familiar with the church. You've been here 20-something years. I don't want to do it. And finally, God says, you're going to do it. I feel like Apostle Paul when Jesus spoke to him on that road to Damascus, says, I want you. And So that's kind of how I wound up in the ministry. I know a lot of people get calls, which is great. My calling was totally different. And again, like I said, I feel like that God just says, you're going to do it, and regardless. And I found it interesting, too. Last night we heard about Moses. This morning we heard about Moses. I was going to talk about Moses. But I want to look at this here, this verse here, about what Jesus said. The Lord has need of him. You know, the Lord has need of each of us. We know that as Christians, God has need of us. As pastors, he has need of us. And one of the things that he has need of, again, that we have to be willing to do, is to serve. We have to be willing to serve in whatever way that God tells us to serve. Now, Jesus is our example. What did he do the night before he was betrayed? He took a towel, he took that basin of water, he went around and washed his disciples' feet. Man, how would you like to wash them? And they wore sandals back then. You know, some of you have been around people that had dirty, smelly feet. But he washed his disciples' feet. Even his betrayer. Even the guy that was going to, in a few hours, betray him. But he took the job of the lowest of the low servants. You know, that was a custom when you went into somebody's house back then, that they would have a servant wash your feet. But I mean, you had to be the lowest guy on the totem pole to wash somebody's feet. But that's a job that Jesus took. And he says, I do this as an example. I serve you as an example. And he says back there in Matthew chapter 20, I think it's the verse number 26 in Matthew 20. But it shall not be so among you. And his disciples, he had said to the mother of Zebedee back up there, she came to Christ and said, hey, would you have one of my sons sit on your right hand and one on your left when you go into your kingdom? And he said, well, that's not up to me to do. And the other 10, of course, they was upset because these two had said that. And so Jesus says back in verse 26, but it shall not be so among you. But whosoever shall be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. You know, that's what God tells us to do. We're to serve. We're not to be the most important. I agree with what my brother said before I go. You know, if people come to church to hear me, good luck. I hope they don't come to hear me. But we come to church to hear from God. That's what it's all about. But God expects us as leaders to be willing to serve. And that's what Christianity is all about. But that's what pastors and church leaders is all about, service. We have to be willing to serve whatever that takes, whatever that means. We have to be willing to serve. Jesus talked about it several times. You know, he did the washing of the disciples' feet. You know, last summer, every year we go into a father-son camp out. This last year, we was having a real struggle trying to find some place to go. The fires had closed everything in New Mexico. And somehow or another, we had gotten a hold of a former student, or a former graduate, actually, of our school. And he had just purchased some property up here that's right next, if you go through Alamogordo, it's back up right borders the National Forest. And he said, why don't y'all go up there? And we said, great. He started, you know, and I say this about our Christian school, we're small, but we put out some students that have done great things. And I don't know for sure what he does. I think he works out in the oil fields. But he had just purchased his property. He only paid $1.4 million for it. They wanted $4 million. But he said he watched the market and it came down. But, you know, when you think about being successful from coming from a small school and be able to pay $1.4 million for a property. Now, this was a great place, but we went up there. It had a house on it. He let us use his house. But my point is, one morning after we ate breakfast, I went in and I started washing the dishes. It's just a normal kind of thing. And one of my men come in and said, why are you washing the dishes? You're the pastor. Oh, they got to be done. Well, the next morning, he was washing the dishes. That's what we do. If people see us as willing to serve, they're more apt to serve. So we live and do this by an example. Jesus said in John chapter 10, that's his Good Shepherd chapter. And what did he say there? He says, I come to lay down my life for the sheep. And he says that like 3 times in that chapter. He says, I come to lay down my life for the sheep. And we know that when we send these Bibles around the world, because there's people out there who are giving up their life for the ministry. We have missionaries out there who are putting their life on the line for the ministry. Some of them are in really dangerous places. We just started supporting a missionary. He's going to Myanmar, which used to be Burma. That's a restricted nation. They have a little map out there from Voice of the Martyrs out there, which shows you restricted nations around the world. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's like 41. They're all through Africa, Middle East, the old Soviet Union, Asia, and Myanmar is one of them. And they're dangerous places. There's others, I think, like 19 hostile countries. Nigeria. Man, Nigeria is one of the most dangerous countries you can go to in Africa, isn't it? And they're killing Christians there all the time. But that's what they're willing to do. And then those Christians that are willing to give their life to, they won't recant. They won't recant. North Korea, if you don't know anything, North Korea is the most hostile nation in the world against Christians. A while back, I read where they had a big stadium, and they filled it with people, men, women, and children. And they put some guys out there in the bottom of that auditorium. And the base is like a big football stadium. And they shot them right in front of everybody. You know why they shot them? They had a Bible. They had a Bible. In North Korea, you get children, if they know about God, they won't tell their parents. You get parents who know about God, they won't tell their children because they indoctrinate the children to turn in their parents. It's crazy. But that's a country, there's a lot of them out there that are just adamantly against Christianity. But yet we have Christians out there, we have pastors out there who are willing to give, to sacrifice their life. So Jesus said, I come to lay down my life for the sheep. That's what he does. That's why he came. As Christians and as Christian leaders, that's our job, to be willing to sacrifice whatever it is that he wants us to do, whatever it is that he tells us that we need to do. And part of that is leading by example. One thing that we learn in the military, one thing I pushed in the military is you lead by example. Don't tell your people to do anything that you're not willing to do yourself. And I know right up until the end, if my people were going on a 12-mile road march, as a command sergeant major, I was right out front. If we're going on a 5-mile run, I was there going on that 5-mile run. And that wasn't easy. I'm paying for it now. But that's how you do it. I must be saying something good. The devil's trying to stop it. He's in every sound system that we have. I mean, he's in ours at home too. We were deployed to in 1993. No, let's see, 1990. I get it right. 96. We were deployed to Bosnia Herzegovina because they had this big thing about keeping peace there, and that was Bill Clinton's thing when he was in the office. I know you don't like Bill Clinton, but come on. And we were out, and we had, we were the first one. My battalion had security of the air base where the task force headquarters was. And so we had to start from scratch. And the guys were filling sandbags and building bunkers and do all kinds of stuff. And I had my driver, if we go somewhere, do I need to use this thing?